Sounds like a Hallmark movie in here. Welcome, my friend. Welcome to the On the Blue Line podcast. That was a very interesting intro music I picked for this one, but welcome. I am the host, Wayne Mulder, and I'm so happy to be back with you again this week. This is a law enforcement podcast where we discuss topics that will empower you on and off the job. Maybe you're tired, frustrated, feeling overworked, struggling to find balance with your work and home demands, or simply you need some encouragement. Well, then I'm telling you, you have come to the right place, and I'm so happy that you're joining us. This week, something different, and I'll tell you all about it here in just one moment. If this is your first time finding us, let me just quickly tell you, we have 2 weekly podcasts. This one is the interview room, and here, this is an interview show where I sit down with different guests. Comes out on Thursdays typically. Again, today's going to be a little bit different format because of the holidays, but typically I sit down with guests from all different walks of life, and we just get good information from them that's going to benefit you in your personal or your professional life. And the other podcast is called Morning Roll Call, releases every Monday at 0500, and it's a weekly monologue show where you and I just sit down and discuss news, recent events, law enforcement trends, and a variety of other topics that gives you something to consider as you begin your week. Both shows are released on most podcast platforms as well as in video on YouTube and Rumble. And the easy way to find everything is to just simply go to ontheblueline.com. So, 4 days until Christmas, if you're watching this on the day or listening to this on the day that it released. So welcome. I hope you are all ready. I know my family and I are getting ready. And of course, if you work in law enforcement, as you know with your schedules, sometimes you're on the holiday, sometimes you're off. I'm fortunate to be off on the actual holiday, but Christmas Eve, I will be working, and know many who will be working on Christmas Day as well. So make sure whatever day it is that you are celebrating the holiday, that you take some time for friends and family and for those things that are very important in each and every one of our lives. So I want to do something different for this week and next week because of the holidays. So there's this question that I have asked at the end of the interview room for pretty much since I began the show. It has evolved a little bit, which we'll get to, but it is, what is that one thing that law enforcement officers can do that's going to make a difference in their personal lives? Well, that question has evolved, and so has the interview room. So what I did is I wanted to create a compilation. So this is going to be a little bit shorter, should be around the 30-minute mark. But I just take a few of the different episodes, and we're going to walk through the answers that different guests have given to that question. So some of them are a couple minutes in length, they're like 1 to 2 minutes, and then others are closer to 5 minutes in length. So not very long, but you're going to get a lot of really good information out of it. So one of the things that really stood out to me is when you go back and look at some of this early video, you will see how far we have come. Sometimes when you're doing these kind of things, such as podcasting or starting a creative venture or something like this, there are times and days where you feel like things are just drudging along, like you're not really getting anywhere. And to go back and look at some of this early video was eye-opening, we'll just say, and definitely a testament to how far we've come. And that is only due to you. So thank you so much for all of you who listen. If you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, sorry, but some of these, we actually didn't start recording video and releasing it. We'd always kind of recorded video because I like that face-to-face interaction with the guest. I think that's important. I think the interviews sound better that way. So even early on, with I think one exception, they all were recorded with video so that we could see each other and we could communicate normally. And I just think you get a much better conversation that way. So, however, the video wasn't actually released as part of the episode until we got to around episode 20 or so. So all of the ones that are part of this montage are not originally released in video. So that means you get special access to these, but then also some of them don't have any video at all because of how they were recorded. So those, you're just going to have a placard. So because of doing it that way, they're not in sequential order because I wanted to bounce back and forth between some with video and some without to make it a little bit more interesting to our friends who are watching on YouTube and Rumble. The clips, like I'd said, are about 2 to 5 minutes each, But if you haven't heard these shows, you're definitely going to find something great from their answers. And I hope maybe you'll go back and listen to the whole episode later if it's something that interests you. And if you have heard them before, it's been about 3 years since most of these have released. So this may be a good time to go back and check it out. So without taking any more time, let's get to today's format. Well, our first guest was literally our first guest. The very first person that I interviewed for the On the Blue Line. And I'm proud to say that it was my brother, Jonathan. And he works in corrections in another state. And it was great to have the opportunity to sit down. In fact, you'll kind of hear reference to it. We had actually been talking at that point about maybe doing a weekly podcast together. Anyone who has done this kind of thing realizes really quick that the scheduling is by far the hardest part. If it's just going to be a sole monologue show, the only person's schedule that really matters is yours. The minute you start talking interviews, the minute you start talking a dedicated co-host, any of that, scheduling can become a nightmare. But nonetheless, the interview room went forward, and so we're going back here to the interview room 1, and it was released on May 17, 2019, and it was called An Inside Perspective. And the question I asked on that very first episode, like I said, it evolved, was what does being a law enforcement officer mean to you personally? And I think you're going to enjoy his answer, and then we discuss what becomes kind of a theme throughout this podcast journey. What does being a law enforcement officer mean to you personally?
It means a lot. I mean, to be in law enforcement means the world to me. You have a lot of days that it can be challenging. It can be heartbreaking. You get to a scene, and whether it's being in a jail cell setting or out on the streets, and to deal with the day-to-day operations that we have to deal with, it can be very rough. But when you help save one life or you help one person, it can mean the world to you. And it's that refreshing step. And when someone walks up to you and buys you, and they don't have to, but out of the kindness of their heart, let's throw that back out there. We're not even say something, buy you something. And some people have. They've walked up and done it. But even when they just walk up and say thank you. I mean, let's be honest. We deal with some of the roughest situations, and those moments when you have somebody just say thank you, it redefines it, and it means the world to me to be able to help somebody and to care for them and to do what I can in society. It's an awesome feeling, and to just get a little thank you means the world.
That's great. Yep. And I'm going to go ahead and answer that question also here being our first podcast, because it's a question that we'll ask different guests and so forth going forward. But you're right on. And I would probably pick a similar answer. For me, it comes down to that whole people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's so true. And no matter what your role is in law enforcement, whether you're the frontline officer, you're a frontline supervisor, or you're up at the admin level, people don't care how much you know about the job, about how you're doing things, about this vast knowledge of law enforcement. We talk about the training, education, and experience as being the groundwork of what you know. And none of that really matters if you can't learn to care about other people. And if you can't learn to convey that empathy for others, be it the people we deal with on the street. Granted, I'm not talking about every bad guy, and we'll get more into that in future episodes. But whether you're talking the person on the street or dealing with fellow officers or dealing with admin or dealing with anyone in between, the question is do they know how much you care? That's what being a law enforcement officer is all about. It's like you said, it's the going after the one. It's about caring for others, because ultimately, all law enforcement, we're in the people business. Like it or not, no matter what reason you came here for, we are in the people business. Now, in episode 2, this is the interview room 2, released on May 30th of 2019, the second guest was Rich Milliman. And in this one, we talked an awful lot about the extra duty programs and the pitfalls that law enforcement officers can often face. I think you're going to enjoy what he has to say, and it is definitely something that resonated with me then, and I'm sure it will with you now. Let me ask you, in your experience and based on your background, what do you think is one of the most important things officers can do to help themselves in their personal lives?
Well, and I think my answer is going to be broader than just for officers themselves, but and it's the same type of advice I've given to my kids. Look, life is kind of a series of decisions where you're weighing the short term against the long term. That's kind of a summary of life, in my opinion, right? So I wake up tomorrow morning, I should really do a 4-mile run. It's raining, I'm sore, I had too much to eat the night before. I really don't feel like it. I am now in a short term versus long term decision. In the short term, the optimal thing is to lie in bed for another hour and a half. And in the long term, the optimal decision is to get out there and do the run, right? And it's the same is true. And again, my answer is geared in the extra duty world. And I'll go back to the beginning of our conversation is working that next detail is a short-term versus long-term decision, right? In the short term, I'm going to get another $400 or $500 for working it. But in the long term, I just spent less time resting or less time with my wife or less time with children or whatever, right? So, and this, while I'm giving the example of in the world of extra duty, it's true in life in general. Everything is short-term versus long-term. So just think about that as you make decisions. Am I making too many short-term focused decisions? In which case, you're going to end up 5 years from now being overweight and all sorts of problems that most of us have. Or are you making too many long-term decisions and you're not enjoying life at all? You're delaying the benefits of life in a sense. So, as a law enforcement officer, where there are these opportunities to work things like city overtime and extra duty and so on, it's a short-term versus long-term, and always consider that.
So I'm skipping one of the episodes. It was the interview room 3, and I'm not going to get into the why here, but next Monday at Roll Call, we're going to talk all about that episode. So be sure to tune in to check that out. But the 4th episode of the interview room was released in October 10th of 2019. And the 4th guest on the show was Sergeant Keith McCarthy. The name of that episode is called A Patrol Sergeant's Perspective. And I asked the question a little bit differently. I said, if you were giving advice to your younger self, you're going back day one, and here you are now a sergeant, and you show up working for you, and you come to the job, what would be the things that you would tell that person? I love it. Well, let me ask you just a couple last questions here, Keith. If you, being a sergeant now, had the opportunity to go back, and you're now young Keith McCarthy, and you show up to work for Sergeant Keith McCarthy now, and it's day one, read off day one, you're now assigned to you, right? If that even makes any sense.
It does. I'm right.
What would you tell the younger you?
I don't think that I would tell myself anything law enforcement wise. I think I would tell myself to be more of a communicator with people I work with. So what people don't know about me, most likely, is I am very introverted. I am 100% happy with spending 99% of the time alone by myself. That's why I ride motorcycles. That's why I do a lot of the things that I do, because I'm very content being with just Keith. And that has been another reason why I like this agency, and it's why I like patrol. It's why I liked property crimes. Everything that I've done in my career, and the thing that I disliked the most was training people. It's because I had to be in a car with somebody for 12 hours a day. In patrol, it's a solo unit, a one-man car. In CID, as a property crimes detective, it's usually one-man work as opposed to major crimes where they go out as a unit. And in my personal life, I do things by myself all the time. So I think that if I could go back and give myself advice coming into this career, would be to network, to get to know people, talk to people, to let people in, because people tell me I'm not such a bad guy. But I'm shy, so I don't like to, I'm shy, and I am very selective in the people that I become friends with. So I think I would probably try to get myself to do a little bit more socializing.
Very good. To that same thing, is there anything you think that agencies can do to better help law enforcement officers coming into this career? Or
I will say just this, along the same lines of the socialization. As a kid growing up, like I was telling you, being kind of enamored with the cop culture, when you watch a lot of these cop movies from 70s, 80s, 90s, probably even today, like NYPD, I came into this profession expecting that there was going to be a culture of cops hanging out together all the time and, living in little communities together and families growing up and doing things. And actually, it's nothing like that at all, at least here. So I think that if I was to have some kind of influence on what the sheriff's office does, I would try to encourage the sheriff or the colonel or anybody else who's in charge of making those decisions of doing something that creates more of a family atmosphere throughout the agency. I know we do things and it doesn't seem like they could take off very well. We have the little things at the FOP Lodge or banquet every year. But I think that they should encourage some kind of communal growth within the agency, maybe on a small level, platoon level, district level, something like that. I would encourage, if I was a sheriff, I would encourage everybody below me to take your area and try to do something that brings you guys together. Because I think that when somebody has a relationship with somebody, they work much better with somebody. That's why I want you to come to this side of the county more. If you could transfer over here, because I work well with you. I think that you and I have got a good relationship. That's not taken away from the guys that I work with now as sergeants, but I don't have the same relationship with them that I do with you. And I think that is good. If you've got a relationship with the guy that you're working next to, you're going to be productive. You're going to be happier, and happy people are more productive people. So
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's exactly, the kind of the bottom line on what I'm even trying to do here. Communication and relationships. That's something we come back to over and over and over again. And yet sometimes I question if we really understand how important that these are in our lives. This whole idea of relationship, community, communication, that really has been the bedrock of why I started on the Blue Line and some of the initiatives that we're doing now and that start in 2023. We're not going to get into that today, but there are some initiatives that I'm working on that I think are really going to hopefully get us to the next level when we talk about things like community, communication, and just how important those are. The next guest of the Interview Room 5 was Otis McGregor, and the name of that episode was Creating Better Leaders, and it released on October 17th of 2019. Let me ask you, what is one thing that for law enforcement officers, first responders, military, what's the one thing that you think they should really consider when it comes to life outside of the job, that life away from work like we were just talking about?
I think it's finding what you enjoy. There's a lot of talk in the early years career development about finding your passion, and if you work in your passion, you never work a day in your life, and all these sort of things. Well, that's all rainbows and unicorns, right? We don't always get to do what our passion is and get paid for it. So what I tell people to do is you have to be conscious of what you're doing and have that understanding and acceptance of where you're at and what you're doing. Accept that as it is and learn to deal with it or change it. And if it doesn't fill your cup up, then find other things that do, whether it's volunteering as a youth sports coach or doing something at your church or starting a podcast or whatever that is that fills the cup up the rest of the way. Because, some of us get lucky and we find something that fills the cup up and you get paid for it. Some of us, the cup only gets filled up about halfway when I'm getting paid, I'm going to fill it up the rest of the way. I mentioned to you earlier about volunteering to help vets in transition and coaching vets. I'm giving back to that community, and I, that helps fill my cup up the rest of the way, because I really, every call I've got with one of those guys or gals and helping them find that next adventure post military is, man, I get fulfilled hearing them discover that path and be able to walk down that path and succeed at it. So yeah, that's what I would tell people to do is, if your cup's full at the end of the day and you're getting paid for it 100%, great. Then you're probably giving back in some form or fashion. You're not just raking in the money off the stock market. But if it's not, then figure out some way to fill it up through giving, because the more you give, the more you get back. There's a lot to be said for that.
Isn't that true? Don't we need to find something that we enjoy doing? I love how he said, though, it's also important to understand, though, that we don't always get our so-called passion project, right? It isn't necessarily go get your passion, but find something you enjoy and then do it. A lot of this episode with Otis really talked about leadership as well. So if you haven't heard that whole episode, I encourage you to kind of go back and listen to it. The next one, we're going to jump ahead to episode 12. Like I said, there was a lot of these here. There's a handful before episode 10 that didn't even have any video whatsoever. So I'm only showing placards if you're watching this on video for those. So I want to jump ahead to episode 12. And then next week, we're going to do the same thing again. And I will get some of those middle ones that we missed in this week's. So this one released on April 9th, 2020. And I had Dr. Paul Henning on the show, and he discussed transforming your health, fitness, and nutrition. And then actually, approximately a year, I think, after I had him on the show, I ended up actually hiring him as a coach. And it was a fabulous experience and really made a difference. It was a really great life-changing moment for me. So definitely enjoyed it. Let's go ahead and hear what Dr. Henning has to say.
Do you have one summary or one takeaway, one thing that law enforcement officers can do to make a difference in their personal life?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. I would say self-care in a nutshell. Okay. And I say that with the kind of, let me preface this. I don't mean like be selfish self-care, but I mean, when you take care of yourself, and whether that be like we talked about mental side here, or we talked about the physical side here on this show, self-care, you're taking care of your mindset, your physical well-being, your fitness levels. I think that's going to reflect, and it's going to help you take care of the ones you love too. Like a lot of us have families out there so I know for myself, I mean, if I take care of myself, I show up better for my family. I do. I just show up better. I show up as a better person. And I think it's just, like I said, I'm not trying to be selfish when I say self-care, but that would be my one thing I would say, my final message.
Isn't that true as well? Self-care. It's something that comes up over and over again. And it is so important, and yet so often we don't do it. So the next guest that I want to introduce you to, it was from episode 13. This one came out on April 16th of 2020, and we had the guest Dan Jarvis with 220 join us, and the work that he's doing is just phenomenal. But that's a different conversation for a different day. But in the episode that he joined us, it was called Take Control of Your Mental Health. And in this clip, we talk a little bit about the importance of wanting help and getting help with post-traumatic stress. And I went ahead and included that in here partially because when I finally get to the question, his answer is extremely short, but it is extremely powerful. So I think you're going to love what Dan has to say.
Well, the decision is ultimately yours to make whether you want to go through it or not. And that's been a pretty big pill for me to swallow because I know I can help some people, but they just won't. They don't believe it. The thing is if you believe in it or not, it's not really relevant. If you go through the process, the brain does it automatically. So if you're that skeptical, just try it out. If they come through the nonprofit 220, we don't charge any money, and we can do it as we're doing this right here. Okay. Through like a Zoom or a Skype call, providing somebody's not actively suicidal, it would have to be with somebody.
Right. Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of actually doing the process. And that's why we do our own podcast called the PTSD Free Podcast. And that's to tell the stories of people who have gone through it. Matter of fact, we just released, our last one was a police officer that's up in Virginia. And she's from the UK, and she went through the RTM, and great podcast. So the stories, that's where the power comes from. And that's what typically the reason we do the podcast, somebody will say, hey, can you help my husband or help my wife? And then the first question I ask, do they want help? And that's the big thing is a lot of us think we're good, we're fine until we're not, Right. So we'll let them, have them listen to the podcast. And, they may listen to 2 or 3 and then get up enough courage to say, okay, sign me up. What do I do? And then we connect them with somebody. That's it. That's all there is to it.
That's awesome.
And then we try to get them to do a podcast when they're done.
Yeah. And I'm going to link all that up in the show notes so people can look those up. In fact, that was going to be one of my next questions is there a success story that stands out to you more than any other ones? Is there that one that it's like, this is amazing?
I would say 3 or 4 that we've done that are pretty compelling. The one with a police officer is really good because, she speaks the language, and, it was great. The one we have the doctor of the industrial organizational psychologist, the Air Force, that hers was very powerful too, because she breaks down even better a lot of the science of what they're doing. And then I've had one gentleman that we got treated who actually got trained. It's called You're Worth It. That's a good podcast. I would say I got about 5 or 6 of them that are really solid.
Okay.
So,
well, and I will encourage any of my listeners that are listening to this and are a little bit skeptical or a little bit unsure. Like you said, the best way to do it, let's listen to these success stories. And then if you're struggling or if you're in a place where nothing else is working, what harm is there in reaching into this and seeing it? If it works for you, and obviously the science that I'm going to put on the website is there. And if it works, why not? Why not at least try?
One of the cool things, I'll leave you with this, and this is a part of the people that they really don't quite understand. You can do the protocol on somebody without them even saying a single word, right? Like just by think about the event, and once you see them have that reaction, and then you can run the protocol. Don't even have to tell me what happened.
Wow, that's awesome. Let me just as a matter of closing question, I ask everybody, what is the one takeaway, the one thing that law enforcement officers can do that's going to make a difference in their personal lives?
Take control of your mental health. Don't just dismiss it.
So on May 8th of 2020, for episode 15 of The Interview Room, I sat down with John Krotek, and the name of this episode was Be an Authentic Human. And I thought that was a powerful name, right? So I think you're going to love what John has to say here.
What is the one takeaway, the one thing that law enforcement officers, or it can be people in general, but law enforcement officers can do that's going to make a difference in their personal lives?
Just keep the brotherhood and the sisterhood strong. If you're out there, anyhow, I have a lot of appreciation for law enforcement. A lot of my buddies are the sheriff of our county is a good friend, and just keep incommunicado, talk to each other. The one takeaway is, whatever you're going through as a law enforcement officer or a sheriff's deputy, your buddies and, your buddiettes are going through the same thing, and you got to talk about it. Y'all are doing a great job, and you have a tough job to do. You're servants of the public, and people look up to you. And set the example. Every time you put your uniform on, I know it's hot because some of those uniforms are dark, but you're doing the community's work. You're helping our community stay safe and, set the example. And you can't do it all the time. It's sometimes easier said than done. Sometimes things are going to piss you off, and certain situations are going to get under your skin, especially when you're doing it day in, day out. But just remember, your job is so valuable to the United States of America, to your neighborhoods, to your community. I can't say enough about law enforcement, and don't let some of the rhetoric that we hear sometimes get you down, because more people feel like I do than not. And we need you. We take care of yourself. We need you out there on the front lines, and we need you around. So if things are bugging you, talk to the people you work with.
So doesn't that sound familiar? It's kind of like we have a little repetition going on here with relationship, communication. That's the thing that I find so ironic about this question and why I ask it over and over again. So often the answers are similar. In fact, you really could distill it down to about 5 common ideas that are said over and over again. And I remember when I was a kid, I was always told repetition is the key to learning. So maybe there's something there that we should be picking up on. Next came episode 16. This came out in June 11th of 2020, and I sat down with Rob Sanderson. He was starting Swell, which was Surf Waves, Enjoy Life, and I love the mission, and still do, of what they're doing for law enforcement, and getting them out there on those waves is a way to kind of help with decompression, and just like the name implies, enjoying life. So I really love what he has to say, so let's listen to this clip from Rob.
What is the one takeaway, the one thing that law enforcement officers can do that's going to make a difference in their personal lives? Kind of that one thing that, and it could be different than maybe what we've talked about, but just boiling it down, the heart of the matter, what's that one thing?
I think as police officers, what we are men and women of service. And I think if you can find a meaningful way to live your life to where it's in service of somebody other than yourself, regardless of what's going on at work or in your personal life, if you can be that conduit of hope or service for another human, that's going to carry you through. And as a service man or woman, that's really what we strive to do. And I think it'll keep your candle lit for a long time.
I love that, Rob. That's so very true. And as we've said time and time again, it's really about others.
Be in service to someone other than yourself. We could almost stop this entire episode right there. We could just stop it with that one point, right? Be in service to someone other than yourself. But we've got one more that I want to go over this week. And that is from episode 17 of The Interview Room. Came out in August 6th of 2020, and it was Chief Chuck. He joined us for an episode called Self, Team, and Mission, and it was a lesson in leadership. I think you're going to really enjoy what he has to say, and we're actually going to end this week with these words from Chief Chuck.
What is the one takeaway, the one thing that law enforcement officers, or anybody for that matter, but law enforcement officers can do that'll make a difference in their personal lives? What's that one thing if you were to boil all this down?
I think that if you can boil all that down is, I think the best way to put it is to put it simple. And, I go back to the old days of good cartoons. Literally understand that you do have that little angel and that little devil sitting on your shoulder. It's called your integrity. It's called your character. Character is who you are. Integrity is what you do when you don't think people are watching you. Your honor encapsulates all of that. So the one thing that you can do personal wise is, be true to yourself. Honestly, be true to yourself. And you need to take time every day. Secretary Gertz, James Gertz, is the Undersecretary for Acquisition for the Department of the Navy. Great leader, great person. I listened to one of his talks, and I have a sticky on my computer monitor, and I have it on my mirror in the bathroom. Secretary Gertz taught us 3 things every day. And this is perfect for law enforcement, especially first responders, military, program managers, anybody with a stress job. 1, self. 2, team. 3, mission. Those are the priorities that you have to take care of every day. And here's why. It sounds selfish, and it absolutely is. You have to take care of yourself first. Hey, get up in the morning, meditate a little bit. It sounds Zen hippie crap, but just that moment of having that coffee on the deck, on the front porch, wherever, that's meditation, man. Get in your space, work out, stay healthy, take care of yourself, because then you'll be able to take care of your team. This goes out in concentric circles. You'll be able to take care of your team, and your team is your family. The team is your workmates. It's your shift at work. If you're a law enforcement officer, it's whoever you're with every day to get something accomplished, which is 3, the mission. The mission is a big overall thing of where we're going and how we're going to get there and what we want to accomplish, whether it's a healthy, happy family, whether it's, hey, we're all going to go out on the blue line today and we're all going to come home at the end of our shift and we're going to go see our family. We're going to go on deployment in the Navy and we're all going to come home successful. We're going to make that deal today. Everybody's going to do their part and we're going to be successful. That takes care of itself. If you work backwards, take care of the team will take care of the mission. You can't take care of the team if you haven't taken care of yourself. So self, team, and mission. That's the best I got.
I think this entire episode could be summarized in the words that Chief Chuck reminded us, right? Take care of yourself. We're going back to what Dr. Paul Henning said, self-care. What does that look like for you? What are the things that you need to be doing? Is it health? Is it fitness? What are the things that you need to do? Meditation. What do you need to do to take care of yourself? Next, take care of your team. Who's your team? Is it your family? It should be part of it. Your spouse, your kids. Who is your team that you're around? Your brothers and sisters in blue, your squad mates, those you're out on the road with right now. Who are those people in your life? And then fulfill your mission. What's your mission? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? How are we going to accomplish it? That actually is going to have a lot to do with what we talk over the next couple of weeks as we begin a new year and we reflect on 2022 and we start looking forward to 2023. I'm going to leave it there for today. These 3 principles should help each and every one of us as we try to prioritize what is most important in our lives. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. We're going to do something similar again for the last week of the last interview room of the year, which comes out next week. Links to each of these shows that we heard portions of are down in the show notes below. So if there's any of these episodes you want to go back and listen to, again, just a reminder, they're not on video, but any of them you want to go back and listen to on any podcast streaming service, they will be there for you. And I think you're going to enjoy a lot of the nuggets and so forth if you hadn't listened to them previously. If you haven't seen this week's Christmas-themed morning roll call, I encourage you to go back and watch it. It was a lot of fun recording it, and I tried to bring home a point that even in darkness, we can choose to be a light. So if you haven't listened to that, I encourage you to. Merry Christmas to you and to your family. From all of us on the Blue Line, thank you for coming back week after week and listening. Don't forget that I'm going to see you next Monday in morning roll call, next Thursday in the interview room. But in the meantime, I'll see you on the Blue Line.